going way back, was phased. Was it in fact, this is my recollection and I would like to have it confirmed, my recollection is that in general, those neighborhoods and areas of town, such as North Chelmsford, such as Old Stage, that had the biggest problem with healthy septic systems were the first neighborhoods in the phasing of the sewer project, and that neighborhoods like my neighborhood in South Chelmsford Precinct 5 were only very recently sewered because in fact our septic systems are pretty healthy and the need wasn't that great. So I'm not questioning whether
No. Again, yes. Bottom line is the state of Massachusetts for a number of years was citing the town for polluting the waterways of the Commonwealth, which means every brook, stream, and drain that was passing through the town, particularly in the more dense sections of town, which are the older sections of town, the half-acre, quarter-acre, 5,000, 10,000 square foot lot scenario, those septic systems, however they were installed, by what system, whatever, were not working properly, were polluting the surface water and groundwaters of the community, and therefore we were quasi-ordered to do a sewer project. We were very close to that day where we were going to be going to court and actually ordered by a judge to do it. The town stepped forward finally and said, yes, we're going to do it. That component of the data that was collected at that point in time basically said that roughly 60%, a little over 60% of the town needed to be sewered underneath this existing project. The remaining town at that particular time was going to remain on septic systems. The question then became, when we were going through the project, and I think the biggest triggering point was, as Town Manager Cohen mentioned, that in roughly '96, the state code, septic code changed, Title V changed, and that change significantly increased, for the protection of the environment and the water supplies and whatever, the requirements to repair and install a new septic system. And pretty simply, the increase in cost of what people were paying to replace their systems went up a minimum of 50%, in some cases 100% of what it used to be. Therefore, that remaining 30-some% of the town was kind of screaming to the town saying, what about us, what about us, what about us? An opportunity came along to the detriment of decision-making on Westford's part, that they didn't move forward through a process, and therefore that capacity that was supposed to go underneath the original treatment plant over in Lowell's, splitting of flows, was supposed to go to Westford. They didn't comply with what they were supposed to do, and particularly they didn't pay us for our piece of the puzzle that we sort of paid up front for them to potentially in the future tie into it. The capacity then got turned over to us. Pretty quickly, when the word got out that there was actually capacity to approach those other sections of town, it was looked at, it was brought at some point in time to this meeting, but also, as far as I know, it went to a ballot vote in 203, or I'm trying to remember what the timeline was, around 203, 204, somewhere in that range there, to go forward with sewering the rest of the town. Okay? To sewer the rest of the town. Clearly, one of the issues was, you're right, the general piece of property that was to be sewered was a larger piece of property. And there was assumption underneath the Title V code that you really needed to have at least an acre of land to make a long history of a septic system possible. Not a guarantee, but possible that if you did things right, there was a good potential that septic could be a resolution for that piece of property. But the cost under this new code change was dramatically elevated. And clearly from the town meetings that we had and some of the sewer reports that came out, people were hearing the cost of the town to sewer a piece of property and the cost of a town potentially for the homeowner to replace that septic system. And the numbers, when they made that change, shifted. Before, it was potentially cheaper to repair your septic system than presumably to tie into sewer. It flip-flopped. And therefore it became more expensive. People wanted to tie in. They thought the others had the opportunity to tie in. We should have the opportunity to tie in. The vote was roughly 79, 19 or 20 or whatever the final numbers were as a vote. And then there was subsequent votes by this body that was in position at that time to vote to expand the funding of the sewer project to get to that. One of the issues that of course we had was the fact that once we created what I call the baseline elevation of that main system, after 20 years of it, you can't lower the whole thing to then go further out. So it created some logistical issues to deal with pumping and pump stations and grinders and whatever. The other side of the coin is that because the rest of the town that was not in, quote unquote, the section of town that DEP and the other regulatory bodies said, you must sewer them. This was a gray area, and you needed to show what the benefit was for it. Which, of course, the benefit wasn't as a high priority as the other areas and also compared to other towns at the time. So it was a competition for available funds. And it was a difficult thing to stay high on the priority list to get certain amounts of money back, or a good higher percentage of money back. And clearly, you just look at the whole project, the funding from the state, federal level just went like this and continued. And particularly when we got into the new areas beyond the original project, it went down to, well, not nothing, but seems like pretty close to nothing.
And is that why the betterment fees were
Yes,
so astronomically higher?
Absolutely. I mean, we had an issue where, and again, I'm generalizing, don't think this is specific. It was sort of like, well, here's the sewer project, and how's it being paid for? A third, this is when it started, a third was sort of taxes. Equal to everybody. Basic premise there was, it's going to protect everybody's water supply. So no matter where you lived in town, if we sewered around where our water supply was, even if you were somewhere else, the water that was being piped to you was protected. And it wasn't going to get contaminated by failing septic systems or whatever. The other third was this state and federal funding scenario. And the other third was the betterment payment. Well, the obvious issue was, what's the best probability of changing some things? As the state and federal funding went down, where can we get the extra money? Going back to the taxpayer is going to be a pretty rough thing. And in fact, I think the parties that were around at the time were very pleased with that vote. To think that 80% of those that voted that day voted in favor of expanding the project, while 50% of those people already had their sewer and could have very easily only thought of themselves and said, hey, I got mine, I don't need to pay for anybody else's. We're not required to do it. There's no court sitting there saying to us, if you don't do it, we're going to bring you to court. But the people of this town made that decision and made that move. So you're right, the betterments went up. Now, of course, the other piece of the puzzle is that because you were in acre lots, let's say, as a general statement, acre lots, how many more feet of pipe do you have to run from one house to another house to another house compared to a Westlands, where every 50 to 75 feet you're picking up two houses? So that increased those costs and whatever. So the issue is your septic systems, because of your capacity to have bigger lots and whatever, had more potential if you wanted to spend the money. And I guess that's the real key. The repair cost when I started working here in 1980, okay, may have been $6,000–7,000. The last few that I did before the sewer project started to take over the predominance of what was going on, we were getting to the $15,000 to $20,000 range. And that's clearly where things are now. So this $20,000 average is all based on, are you on a home that's got great natural soil conditions and water table conditions, or are you in one of those borderline passable pieces of property that have not too great of property, not too great of water table issues, and also your perk rate is very slow, so your system's very, very large. And Town Manager Cohen mentioned the fact that if you look around at a lot of the surrounding towns that are still doing septic systems, you see these big mounded things sticking in yards with pipes sticking out of them, whatever. That seems to be under the new code, the new very expensive option for that. So, yes.
Okay. I have one more question, and thank you for all that information. Is there anyone that can explain to me why that balance tips so greatly from pumping stations and grinder pumps when it was the areas that had the greatest need that got done first? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Well, I mean, again, when you have the initial project, you set a baseline of elevation depth of where that system was going to tie into, and then you then decided to spread out from that low connection point, that very expensive low connection point that you started with. Okay, how far can I go out in every direction from basically the low line as I spread out through the community? And of course, you also see in the maps where are most of those areas that we're talking about, the furthest away from the low line. Now, I know there's a few exceptions to that issue, but the issue is, as a general statement, they were the furthest away, and the farther you go, the higher the pipe keeps coming. You go further, the pipe is higher in the ground, higher in the ground, higher in the ground, so you get to the edges of the town, and you can't really keep your collection pipes in the ground. Therefore, it's an issue of pumps. And then the other issue is that because you're larger and more spread out, the concentration of that area to collect together to a pump, in a congested area of the town, there may be 200 or 300 homes congested to this thing to then pay for a pump station. While over here, because of some geographical issues where you're trapped here and there's a large wetland on the other side, there's 8 or 9 houses trapped here and 5 or 6 is trapped over there. So you sit there and go, how do we put in a large collective, municipal pump station for blank number of houses? So you had a lot of variability. Again, there's some on one side and there's some on the other side in regards to numbers. But as I said, that was the difficulty that you had as we were spreading out to the far extension of the project, of where we were, some of the fixed places that we're at, and therefore where do you go from there?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Don't go too far.
Sue Carter, Precinct 5. I have a question for either Richard or other former sewer commission members. I'm a civil engineer, and I know when I look at designing a gravity sewer, there's a certain threshold of efficiency for individual ejector pumps versus a municipal pump station. And when I say efficiency, it may be because of the volume of flows and cycling of pumps as well as for cost. I remember asking Chelmsford for some guidance in the past, and I don't remember. What was your threshold number for where it was better to go with individual ejector pumps versus a pump station. Just to give everybody here a little bit of a landmark to understand.
Well, again, I'm not Weston and Sampson, who was the design engineer and whatever. It seemed to be that there was a perception of, and again, was there this magic number, okay, of 5 houses, 10 houses, 15 houses, 20 houses. I mean, clearly if you had 100 houses, you clearly fell into this scenario, that was around the town that, like you said, the flows, the capacity of the pumps, and the frequency of the cycling and the cost. I mean, a large lift station may cost you $100,000 plus, okay? Plus all the other amenities about the force main and other kinds of things. So clearly there was that balance. I can't tell you, after those discussions of, basically we're talking back, 96
I
or whatever.
vaguely remember something like 20 or 25.
Yeah.
That was the threshold. So if you were on a little cul-de-sac with 5 houses on it, it was much more efficient to go with individual pumps versus a pump station. But I don't.
And the other side of that, coin, in regards to, and again, I understand the issue of, well, the cost and not the cost and whatever. One of the things that we always tried to do was, we'll do something if we can get some additional funding from other sources to do it. Part of the problem is that, good, bad, or indifferent at the time, the state was basically saying to us and others, it wasn't just us in the state that was installing sewer, we're not paying you, we're not going to subsidize this contract with any kind of funding based on that you want to do gravity sewer to this small little cluster of whatever. So it was like, it's all on you. As I said, good, bad, or indifferent, decisions made, not made, but the fact was they weren't going to pay. They didn't see, the state, the approving authorities and the funding authorities did not see the practicality of spending their money to subsidize a community to do these kinds of things. And you look around and see that in other communities like Chelmsford, where they were installing grinder pumps. Good, bad, or indifferent, they were installing grinder pumps.
Thank you.
Jim Como, Precinct 4. 2 questions, Richard.
Okay.
The pump stations, are they actually grinder pump stations, or are they just pumping stations?
No, I mean, bottom line is every pump
Is a
needs
grinder
to
pump?
be able to move liquids and solids.
Oh, that's okay. So
I mean, there was an older system, but they decided that the technologies of today. There used to be an older system that only pumped effluent out into the street, into the sewer, and all your solids stayed on property, and you kept your septic system, you kept your tank component of your septic system, and you had to continue to pump and maintain and break down the solids and whatever, because the solids were not going out. That kind of floated around just for a very short period of time, and they just basically said, nah.
Can't do it.
So the grinder became the option.
Next question is the monopoly that this company has on the grinder pumps and the repairs. Who signed an agreement with this company that they have the monopoly and they're the only ones that we have to deal with? These folks have to deal with.
Well, the obvious issue is, can any community control the market? Fairly simply, we decided to try to, in the attempt to balance things, and that attempt to balance things, of course, was the issue of, if you tied a sewer, we're going to give you a $3,000 E1, and again, I'm just rounding the numbers up, a $3,000 E1 pump for $1. So underneath the contract of construction, we're buying blank number of grinder pumps at a cost of whatever the number was, high 2000s. kind of thing.
But how did we get into a place where we're really dealing with one company that has a monopoly and we have to buy all the parts from them? And they're
Well,
the only
I
ones that
mean,
can service these machines?
it's-
It seems a little shady there.
Well, no, I mean, we can't control, it's not that there was just one company out there that creates pumps.
Yeah, but right now, all these folks have to
Well,
deal with
but
one
again,
company.
the business setting said, no, I don't want to do this business, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm not going to compete, whatever. I mean, no community can control it. I mean, the only, if you want to call it advantage or disadvantage, the disadvantage is that they seem to be the only, again, on warranty, of course they're the only ones in town.
Yeah.
I mean, in the warranty component of things, whoever the warranty is through, and they're going to have a total thing to do any repairs or replacements under warranty because that's what you paid for.
Okay, so when
Now, after the warranty periods are over, is there any other pump entities out there that want to compete, if you want to call it that, with any one pump company, quote unquote, F.R. Mahoney? Do they want to compete with them? I mean, the other side of that coin is that if the town made a decision, which they could have, we're not going to. We don't want any kind of standardization. It's potentially, and again, back then, it's your problem. I don't care what you put in. You can jerry-rig anything you want up. That'll pump it from over here to over there. You know, you can use an old washing machine pump if you want. I don't care. No, the town didn't do that. The town set some minimum specs on that piece of equipment to sort of be the standard at that particular point in time.
How long is the warranty on those pumps?
They